All right, let's see if I can bumble out some things. Now that I have talked about the psychological triune brain, neuroplasticity, the workings of our current neurological makeup, I want to get into some of my own kind of like philosophy and like speculative science. I have observed what I would call a neural spiral in evolution. This is for me observing the evolution of the brain as it came into time and space. And I see it as a spiral of integration, starting with somewhere around like 7 million years ago to like 2.5 million years ago, with early hominids, they were right brain dominant, bottom up, if you will, van processing, controlled by the right brain, more about the holistic, context-based, very feeling dependent, not communicative verbally, or very limited potentially. And then we evolved to be more communicative humans, and that was more like from the 2.5 million to like the 300,000 years ago, with Homo habilis, the tool-using humanoids. They were much more left-brained. They were communicating, they were using tools, and they were developing the top-down processes of having to use tool usage. Their brain size actually had doubled at this point, and it was a branching into brain lateralization. So there was there was much more dominant of left brain eventually as we got into Homo sapiens too. Homo sapiens became very left brain dominant. And this is like the third stage of the spiral here. We're rounding a corner, 300,000 years to like present time, where we were using like symbolic art and complex social rituals. The brain size changed even bigger. So it was like the first stage, the brain size looks like it was, compared to chimpanzees, it was like a 400 to 500 centimeters cubed. And then the second stage, it doubled in size, was 600 to 1,000. And then the third stage is like where we're currently at still, like 1,400 to 1,500 centimeters cubed. And we had our massive like PFC and parietal lobe boom. And this is where we were able to intentionally integrate, right? So now we can think about thinking, right? And still our most recent brain, just learned this, most recent brain shape apparently is still like 100,000 years to 35,000 years. Of course, these are, large estimations, but apparently our brain was more like a rugby ball, and this time it became more rounded. It was they call it a globularization. That was a fun one. And so I'm seeing this pattern as moving in a spiral of integration, where we are now in a place where we can use this highly evolved prefrontal cortex to reintegrate the hemispheres, kind of like via the corpus callosum, which is like that big hunk of meat between our brains that help our brains communicate. And so this leads me into neurodivergence and what is happening in neurodivergence. These like what I see as like functional hiccups in our brains. is part of the brain integrating. It's part of the reintegration of the right hemisphere with a much more highly evolved left hemisphere, like getting back to the right hemisphere with this like pumped up left side. And it's causing these hiccups due to societal upbringing as well. So we've had historically pretty sexist dynamics, right? And so we're noticing in psychology too, as we study more around neurodivergence and autism, that females who express neurodivergence are usually have a high ability for neuroception, which is your ability to, it's very right-brained process, the ability to pick up on social cues, facial expressions, and men are more often not nurtured in those spaces because, I mean, all of our upbringing and survival in society is based around survival, right? And what's going to keep us safe. And so women know that if we don't clock how people are in the room, we're not going to be safe. Whereas men they've pretty much been safe most of the time. And I mean, that's obviously a very broad statement, and men have not been safe, sure. But society is very made for men, very made by men. So men are usually much safer, although they're not. And they end up cutting off access to the right hemisphere because it hurts so bad. And it's causing so many more issues. And of course, I mean, there are plenty of genetic predispositions that can affect this, but the neuroplasticity of the brain is phenomenal, and depending on how we are nurtured within the very first few years of our lives really determines how this is going to unfold. Where else can I go? I feel like that's probably pretty solid. I hope that made sense. I'll probably do some more at some point, but we'll kill it here. Okay.